The archive is open. Come in out of the cold, your chair is where you left it, the one by the lamp. Tonight I've pulled a long road from the shelves, or rather, a great many roads, the routes of merchants, pilgrims, animals, letters, and goods that we now call the Silk Roads. You don't need to remember any of this. There's no test at the end. If you drift, I'll keep reading. Let's begin. Begin with a line that was never really there. On a modern map, the Silk Road is often drawn in red. It leaves an imperial capital in China, crosses a band of deserts and mountains, passes through famous cities, and arrives somewhere near the Mediterranean. The line is smooth enough to follow with one finger. It gives distance a beginning, a middle, and an end. It is useful. It is also misleading. The people who used these routes did not wake beneath one name that covered the continent. They knew the next valley, the next gate, the next market, the next water source, or the next political border. A merchant might know where wool sold well 3 towns away. A drover might know which pass opened first in spring. A pilgrim might carry directions to a monastery beyond an oasis. An official might think of a road as the line between garrisons. None required a single map from Chang'an to Rome. There were land roads, river crossings, mountain tracks, step corridors, and sea lanes. They widened where carts could pass and narrowed where a loaded animal placed one careful hoof before another. They shifted when a well failed, a ruler changed, a market grew, or a border became difficult. Some routes lasted for centuries. Others were useful for a season and then faded back into the ground. Silk gave the network its modern name, but silk was never the only thing moving. Textiles, horses, glass, metalwork, paper, aromatics, dyes, medicines, stones, ceramics, and foodstuffs traveled different distances. So did letters, stories, prayers, melodies, craft techniques, and news. Not everything went equally far. Grain might feed the next settlement. A small stone could cross several kingdoms. A pattern woven into cloth might travel farther still, copied by hands that never met the first maker. Most goods did not remain with one merchant from beginning to end. They were sold, taxed, repacked, combined with other cargo, divided into smaller lots, and handed onward. A person could spend a career moving between 2 familiar cities, while an object passed through many such careers. The long-distance system was therefore assembled from shorter knowledge. This is the road we will follow tonight. Not one heroic crossing and not a parade of emperors. We will travel by practical stages. We will watch a Bale enter a ledger, wait beside a city gate, follow water through an oasis, adjust a saddle, listen to several languages in one market, and close the heavy gate of a roadside inn after the last animal enters. Our main path belongs to the 7th and 8th centuries, when Tang China, the oasis communities of the Tarim Basin, the settlements around the Tian Shan, and Sogdian merchant networks were deeply connected. Even within that frame, conditions changed from one reign, season, and district to another. We will leave room around what the evidence cannot make uniform. Later, when the route reaches the caravanserais of the Iranian plateau and the long memory of the Silk Roads, I will tell you that time has moved. We will not make one imaginary evening contain 1,000 years. For now, picture the map without its red line. There are dots instead, a walled city, a spring, a river ford, a market, a monastery, a post station, a courtyard with room for animals, a settlement where someone can replace a broken strap. Between the dots are distances measured not only in miles, but in water, fodder, weather, permission, and trust. No dot is the whole road. Remove enough of them, however, and the crossing becomes impossible. That is the quiet machinery of the Silk Roads. Distance did not disappear. It was divided into pieces that people, animals, and communities could manage. Each successful stage ended near the supplies needed to begin another. Here is the detail to carry with you into sleep. On a low table lies a map covered with many pale pencil marks. Some follow rivers, some bend around sand, some stop at a name and begin again in another hand. No mark reaches across the whole sheet alone, but where they overlap, a route appears, made from one careful line after another. A road begins before anyone steps onto it. It begins in a storeroom, a workshop, a stable yard, or a market office, where someone decides that an object is valuable enough to move and practical enough to carry. Long land journeys favored goods that could survive handling and justify the cost of transport. Silk suited that work well. It was light compared with many raw materials, could be folded or rolled, and held great value in places far from its production. Yet even silk did not simply leave one loom and proceed untouched toward the setting sun. It might first enter a local market as cloth, thread, finished clothing, or part of an official payment. It might be presented at court, exchanged for horses, used to settle an account, or purchased by someone who expected to sell it again. Its journey could begin as commerce, taxation, diplomacy, wages, obligation, or gift. Those categories often met one another on the same road. Before departure came inspection. Cloth had to be protected from damp, dirt, insects, sparks, and repeated loading. It could be wrapped in plainer fabric, tied with cord, placed inside a bundle, and marked so that ownership remained clear after the cargo joined many similar shapes. Other goods needed different care. Glass required cushioning. Aromatics had to be contained. Metal objects added weight quickly. Dyes, medicines, and spices could lose value through moisture or adulteration. A merchant did not merely possess cargo, he managed its condition. Then came the list. The surviving documents of the Silk Roads are uneven, but they remind us that movement produced writing. Letters asked agents to buy, sell, collect, or wait. Contracts recorded obligations. Officials counted people, animals, taxes, and supplies. Labels and notes connected a bundle to a person who might be several stages away. A ledger made memory portable. Not every transaction used the same coin, script, weight, or legal custom. That was part of the work. A measure accepted in one market might need explanation in the next. Coins could be valued by authority, metal, familiarity, or local practice. Some exchanges depended on credit and reputation rather than a pile of currency placed immediately on the table. Trust rarely floated free of evidence. It could rest on family connections, merchant communities, witnesses, seals, letters of introduction, previous dealings, or the knowledge that a dishonest partner would lose access to future trade. The road joined strangers, but it also encouraged networks in which a name arrived before its owner did. This is one reason the Silk Roads cannot be reduced to moving objects. A bale traveled inside a web of claims. Someone had paid for it. Someone expected it. Someone might share in its profit. Someone might be responsible if rain entered the wrapping or if a portion disappeared between two inventories. The cargo itself was mixed. Luxury goods attract museums because they survive as beautiful evidence. Patterned textiles, carved stones, precious metal, painted ceramics, and glass that once seemed to hold a distant color. But a caravan also required ordinary supplies that might never enter a collector's case. Rope, sacks, spare leather, cooking vessels, blankets, fuel, food, and fodder made the valuable objects movable. Regional trade in grain, salt, wool, timber, and animals supported communities along the longer routes. One merchant's cargo might therefore contain goods meant for distant resale besides supplies intended to vanish during the journey. Each day's grain became tomorrow's empty sack. Each repair used a little of the spare cord. The road consumed part of what moved along it. Packing required balance as much as protection. An animal carrying unequal loads would tire and suffer. A bulky object could catch against a narrow passage. A bundle tied too loosely would shift. One tied too tightly could damage what it was meant to protect. The correct knot was not decoration. It was a small decision repeated until the load could move as one. At the edge of the yard, animals waited while people checked the inventory again. A missing package discovered inside the city was an inconvenience. The same discovery after a day's travel could become a dispute between several people, none standing near the shelf where the error began. So the departure remained quiet for a little longer. A clerk held the list. A merchant touched a seal to make sure it had set. A drover pressed one bundle, then another, testing the tension of the cords. Around them, the city continued with no reason to notice that a small piece of a continental network was being assembled in a yard. Here is the detail to carry with you into sleep. A folded textile rests inside a cover of plain cloth. Two cords cross over it and meet in a compact knot. Beneath the knot is a small seal, no larger than a thumbprint. The silk cannot be seen. What can be seen is the care taken to make sure it arrives as the same bundle that left. In the 7th and 8th centuries, Chang'an was one of the largest and most cosmopolitan cities in the world. It was not the beginning of every Silk Road journey, nor the source of every object called Chinese. But for our east-to-west frame, it offers a useful place to watch local order become long-distance movement. The city was planned behind walls, with broad avenues, ward gates, government offices, palaces, temples, workshops, residences, and regulated markets. People from many regions lived or conducted business there. Languages, clothing, food, music, beliefs, and objects from Central Asia were part of urban life, not distant rumors waiting beyond the gate. A westbound departure, therefore, did not begin at the edge of civilization. It began inside a place already shaped by contact. In a market, goods were not arranged according to a modern museum label called Silk Road. They belonged to trades and needs. A horse had to be judged as an animal, not as a symbol of exchange. Cloth had width, weave, color, finish, and price. Metalwork could be weighed and inspected. A foreign-looking object might have been made locally by a craftsperson familiar with imported forms. Distance could be part of value, but usefulness and quality still mattered. The city also imposed procedures. Authorities cared about movement through gates, commercial order, taxation, security, and the people arriving from beyond imperial territory. The exact rules changed. Their existence meant that a merchant's freedom was never simply the freedom to point west. Documents had to agree with people and cargo closely enough to satisfy whoever held authority at the next threshold. Animals needed to be assembled without blocking a busy street. Loads might be brought from separate storerooms. Partners and agents had to know which promises had been fulfilled before the city walls made correction harder. Then there was the question of company. A caravan was not necessarily one permanent organization. Travelers could join for a stage because moving together offered assistance, shared knowledge, and some protection. They could separate at a market or road junction. A merchant with several animals might travel beside pilgrims, messengers, drovers, servants, or other traders whose plans overlapped only until the next city. The word caravan can make the group sound grander and more uniform than it was. Some were large, others were modest. The number depended on cargo, wealth, route, political conditions, and purpose. What mattered at the gate was less the romance of the procession than whether every animal, person, and bundle could pass into the road beyond. Departure time belonged partly to the city and partly to the season. Leaving at dawn offered cooler hours and more daylight for the first stage. Yet a gate opened according to rules, not private impatience. A delayed document, damaged strap, missing partner, or difficult animal could hold the entire plan in place while the sun rose higher. Outside the walls, cultivated land did not end at once. Roads crossed fields, irrigation, villages, and the traffic that supplied the capital. The great city depended on nearby grain, animals, fuel, labor, and water. A traveler moving west did not pass instantly from polished court life into empty desert. The transition came by degrees. This is worth keeping in mind when old routes are described as bridges between civilizations. A bridge has two ends and a clear span. The Silk Roads had neighborhoods, outskirts, farms, ferries, toll points, side roads, and people whose work served travelers without carrying them very far. The network thickened around cities because cities could support complexity. At the western gate, the bundles looked much as they had in the yard. The difference was permission and direction. Inside, the merchant could still return to the storeroom before supper. Outside, each correction would depend on what the next settlement could provide. The animals moved first by inches. A lead rope tightened, hooves found the road, wheels turned if carts belonged to the stage. Voices that had been giving instructions settled into the shorter sounds used to keep a group moving. Behind them, the gate remained busy. Their departure was not an event for the whole city. Another group waited. Another official examined another document. Another bundle entered the space between ownership and arrival. Here is the detail to carry with you into sleep. Dawn reaches the city wall from above, sliding slowly down brick and packed earth. At the gate, the shadow still covers a row of loaded saddles. One by one, as the animals step forward, each load passes from cool shade into the first light of the road. West of the capital, movement gradually entered a long geographical passage. The Hexi Corridor runs between the Tibetan Plateau to the south and the Gobi regions to the north. It connects the central plains of China with the approaches to Dunhuang and the routes beyond. On a map, it can look like a narrow neck. On the ground, it contained fields, towns, rivers, dry stretches, military positions, walls, and many separate days of travel. The corridor did not make the journey easy. It made a journey possible through a landscape that directed where roads and settlements could endure. Water again came first. Snow and rain falling in distant high country-fed rivers that crossed the corridor. Where water could be managed, settlements grew crops and supported animals. Irrigation turned limited flow into fields, gardens, and stored food. A traveler saw not simply nature providing an oasis, but generations of maintenance. Channels cleared, banks repaired, gates adjusted, and rights negotiated. Every bowl of grain or bundle of fodder offered to a caravan rested on that local work. The corridor also belonged to states that wanted to communicate and watch. Fortifications, beacon towers, garrisons, walls, and post stations formed another network alongside commerce. Their condition changed with political authority, but their purpose was practical. Messages had to move, borders had to be observed, troops and officials needed supplies. A road useful to merchants was also useful to governments, and governments rarely ignored that fact. From one watchpoint, a signal could be answered farther along. Smoke or fire converted distance into a sequence, much as the caravan did. No single tower needed to reach the capital by itself. It needed to reach the next place where someone was watching. For ordinary travelers, official infrastructure could offer order and create scrutiny at the same time. A guarded route might be safer from some threats. It might also bring inspections, restrictions, taxes, or closure. A document accepted yesterday could become less useful under a different commander or during a period of conflict. This was not a road outside politics. It was a road made and remade by them. Still, much of a day's movement remained stubbornly physical. Dust entered clothing, leather dried, a wheel or shoe needed attention. Animals reached water with their own urgency, sometimes more clearly expressed than the merchants. Loads had to be kept away from mud where irrigation crossed the track, then protected from grit when the surface dried again. The group did not move at one unchanging pace. A settlement could slow it through business and paperwork. Open ground could spread the animals into a longer line. A narrow crossing gathered them close. Wind altered conversation. One difficult load could reduce the speed of everyone behind it. At stopping places, local commerce folded around long-distance trade. A resident might sell fodder without caring where the customer's silk would eventually go. A smith might repair a fitting made in another district. A cook might recognize foreign preferences or simply serve what was available. Children could watch unusual animals enter and then return to chores that had nothing to do with continental exchange. The route's famous distance was therefore built from many local transactions too ordinary to receive a grand name. As the caravan moved farther west, the capital became less useful as an immediate reference. People spoke instead of the next town, the next official station, the next river, or the next place where the road bent. Information contracted to the scale of action. This is how a long journey remains manageable. The mind does not carry the whole continent at every step. It carries today's water and tonight's shelter. Tomorrow's problem can remain beyond the next low ridge until the group has finished with this one. Near evening, a watchtower appeared as a small shape against the sky. Farther away was another, barely distinct. Their spacing made the corridor legible to authority. The fields and wells made it livable to everyone else. Here is the detail to carry with you into sleep. On a ridge, a watchfire is uncovered against the dark. For a moment, it seems alone. Then, far to the west, a second light answers. The first keeper cannot see where the message will end. He only waits long enough to know that the next station has received it. Dunhuang stood where geography required decisions. To its west lay routes that divided around the Taklamakan desert. To its east stretched the Hexi Corridor. Nearby passes, walls, watchposts, religious sites, cultivated land, and desert approaches made the oasis more than a place to refill water. It was a point where information gathered before travelers committed themselves to another section of road. The city had long served military, administrative, religious, and commercial functions. During the first millennium, its rulers and political setting changed. Its importance did not depend on belonging permanently to one authority. It depended on location and on the community's ability to support movement through a difficult region. For a caravan arriving from the east, the first need was not wonder, it was recovery. Animals needed water, fodder, rest, and inspection. People needed food, sleep, and news. Leather that had begun to split in the corridor could be replaced. A loose fitting could be tightened. Supplies consumed since Chang'an had to be counted against the less forgiving stages ahead. The oasis made these tasks possible because people lived there all year. Farmers maintained fields and water. Craftspeople repaired useful things. Religious communities received pilgrims and accumulated texts. Officials recorded and controlled. Merchants stored goods, waited for partners, and learned which route was currently open or troubled. Dunhuang's surviving manuscripts preserve an extraordinary range of that life. The documents associated with the nearby Mogao caves were written in many languages and scripts. Chinese and Tibetan appear beside Sanskrit, Khottanese, Sogdian, Aigha, and others. Religious texts are prominent, but the wider documentary world also contains contracts, letters, calendars, accounts, medical writing, and the practical residue of people managing ordinary affairs. The languages are evidence of contact without requiring us to imagine perfect harmony. Different communities could trade with one another and still remain distinct. Translation could open a transaction, but it could also leave uncertainty. A person fluent in two languages possessed a skill as necessary to some stages as knowledge of a well. Among the most intimate evidence are the Sogdian ancient letters, found west of Dunhuang in the remains of a watch post. They date from centuries before our main Tang-era frame, around the early 4th century, so we must let time move backward when we open them. They show that Sogdian merchant networks were already stretched across great distance. The writers sent news, commercial instruction, anxiety, and requests toward communities far away. One letter was written by a woman named Miune, stranded in Dunhuang and trying to return to her mother after her merchant husband abandoned her. Her words survive not as a symbol of triumphant exchange, but as evidence that mobility could leave one person with fewer choices than another. The road connected, it also separated. By the 7th and 8th centuries, Sogdian communities and agents remained important across Central Asia and in China. A merchant arriving in Dunhuang could encounter people whose family or commercial relationships pointed west towards Samarkand, while their daily lives had become rooted in the east. The network was not made only of visitors. It was made of settlers too. That distinction matters. A cosmopolitan oasis was not a temporary camp where everyone planned to leave. Children were born there, buildings were repaired there, prayers were copied there. People learned several kinds of food, clothing, music, and speech because the crossroads was home. Before departure, information became another form of cargo. Which branch held water? Had a local conflict changed the safer road? Were animals available beyond the next stage? Had a partner sent a letter? Was a debt ready to be collected? Or would the merchant have to wait? Waiting was part of travel. A caravan could remain in an oasis while weather changed, animals recovered, goods sold, or companions assembled. Movement across continents included many days when nothing moved beyond a courtyard or storeroom. At last, the loads were rebuilt. Some cargo stayed in Dunhuang. New goods joined. A letter might be entrusted to someone heading west without certainty that the same hand would carry it home. The next route began with less confidence than a red line on a map suggests, but with more local knowledge than an outsider could see. Here is the detail to carry with you into sleep. A small paper letter is folded along old creases. The address points toward a home beyond mountains and desert. It is placed inside a traveler's pouch beside a piece of cord and a few coins. The message weighs almost nothing. For the person who wrote it, it may be the most important thing leaving the oasis. West of Dunhuang, the road became a choice. The Taklamakan Desert occupied the center of the Tarim Basin, and the principal land routes bent around its edges. One chain of oases passed to the north, another passed to the south. Neither was a permanent line, and neither was chosen by looking only at the shortest distance. Water, season, political control, pasture, and recent news all mattered. A route that had served one generation could weaken when a river shifted or a settlement declined. Another could become busier under a ruler able to maintain order. Sand did not need to swallow an entire city overnight to alter travel. A neglected channel and several poor harvests could make one stop less dependable year by year. Travelers therefore asked local questions. How far to the next usable water? Had wind covered part of the track? Was a pass open? Could fodder be purchased, or must more be carried? Had another group arrived from the west with news of delay? The desert was not empty, but its communities were separated by ground that offered little margin for careless planning. Around the basin, oasis towns depended on rivers descending from surrounding mountains. Water supported fields, orchards, animals, workshops, and houses. The road reached them because life had already gathered there. This reverses the usual image. An oasis was not created for a caravan. A caravan depended on an oasis community whose own needs came first. At a junction, the group could divide. A merchant might choose the branch where he had partners. A pilgrim might travel toward a religious site. Someone with fragile cargo might prefer a longer road known for better shelter. Companions who had shared weeks from Chang'an could discover that their useful overlap ended beside one weathered marker. Farewells on a trade route were practical. Information was exchanged once more. A debt was acknowledged. A letter changed hands. Then one set of animals turned north while another continued toward the southern horizon. Beyond the junction, tracks were evidence rather than command. Hoofprints showed that someone had passed, but not whether the water ahead remained good. Wind softened the edges. A guide's knowledge joined visible marks with remembered distances, hills, stars, vegetation, and the shape of dry ground. The caravan carried water, but carrying water added weight. It carried fodder where grazing could not be trusted, but fodder also had to be carried by the animals that would eat it. Each precaution reduced room for profitable cargo. Each missing precaution increased dependence on a landscape that did not promise rescue. This arithmetic encouraged patience. Loads were checked before leaving shade. Containers were examined for leaks. The departure hour avoided unnecessary heat where possible. No speech about courage could replace a sound water vessel. Near evening, the chosen road seemed less like a line than a broad area of possible passage. The guide adjusted direction. Behind the caravan, the other branch had already vanished from sight. Several days later, the route's logic repeated itself at a smaller scale. A low ridge divided the view. One track passed near a settlement and another cut across firmer ground. The first offered supplies but added distance. The second saved time only if an uncertain water source remained usable. No map could settle the question by itself. A map preserves what someone knew when marks were made. A road decision belongs to the morning on which it is taken. The group waited for travelers approaching from the opposite direction. Their animals carried dust from the stage ahead. Questions moved quickly. The condition of the well, the price of fodder, the number of days since another caravan had passed, and whether officials at the next town were allowing ordinary traffic through. Answers were compared rather than simply believed. A merchant might emphasize trouble to discourage competition. A tired traveler might remember distance as longer than it was. A guide listened for details that could be checked against landmarks and season. The road was therefore maintained partly through conversation. Each moving group carried a temporary report of the ground behind it. Where written notices were rare or slow, fresh observation became a form of infrastructure. At midday, heat shortened attention. Animals were brought into whatever shade the terrain allowed. Water was issued according to need and supply rather than the impatience of the wealthiest traveler. A damp cloth protected one container whose contents would spoil in prolonged heat. Another bundle was raised away from ground that had begun to soften near a channel. Nothing in this halt looked continental. People ate. A strap was stitched. Someone slept with one hand resting on a folded coat, yet the ability to stop without losing order was part of what allowed valuable goods to continue. Near the next oasis, cultivated trees appeared before walls did. Their line showed where water had been persuaded to remain near the surface. The caravan's pace changed. Animals recognized the signs as clearly as people. Arrival brought inspection from both directions. Travelers judged the settlement's supplies. Residents judged the travelers' ability to pay, obey local practice, and leave without creating trouble. Hospitality and commerce were not identical, though they often occupied the same courtyard. By morning, the route decision that had seemed difficult was already behind them. Another stood ahead. This was how the desert's edge was crossed, not by defeating uncertainty once, but by reducing it enough for one more stage. Here is the detail to carry with you into sleep. Beside a low marker, two sets of tracks separate. One curves north, the other continues west before bending south. Wind moves a thin veil of sand across both. By morning, the choice will remain, but the sharp edges of every hoofprint will be gone. Turpan teaches the road to look below the surface. The basin is low, dry, and intensely hot in summer, yet its settlements supported agriculture through carefully managed water. Channels known today through the Carez system carried groundwater from higher ground toward fields and communities, often through underground passages that reduced evaporation. The surviving landscape represents long development rather than one construction date. For our travelers, the important fact is simpler. An oasis depended on knowledge embedded in shafts, gradients, channels, maintenance, and shared labor. Water arrived quietly. It did not need to resemble a broad river. It could move through darkness beneath dry earth, guided by a slope slight enough to sustain flow without destroying the channel. At the surface, its effects became visible. Trees offered shade, fields produced grain and fodder, vines and orchards made use of the oasis climate. People washed, cooked, watered animals, and stored what could be preserved. A caravan entering Turpan encountered not a miraculous green spot, but an engineered and inhabited system. That system set limits. Travelers could not assume unlimited water merely because a channel existed. Local households, fields, and herds depended on it. Access could be regulated by custom and authority. Animals had to be led and watered without damaging banks or fouling a source. Rest spread work across the oasis. Drovers inspected feet and skin for injuries hidden by dust. Tack was loosened, cleaned, and repaired. Merchants opened selected bundles to check for damp or damage while leaving others sealed. Food was purchased. News moved between courtyards faster than the cargo did. The market revealed how far the oasis reached. Local produce stood beside objects that had arrived from other regions. A pattern on cloth could carry Western influence, while the cloth itself had been woven nearby. A foreign coin might pass by weight or be refused. Categories that seem clear in a museum became mixed in use. People also stayed. Merchant communities along the Silk Roads were not temporary crowds appearing only when a caravan arrived. Families established homes, religious places, and business relationships. Translation became ordinary labor. A child growing up among several languages might later provide the connection a visiting merchant lacked. At night, the difference between desert and oasis could be heard. Water moved somewhere out of sight. Animals fed. A repairer's tool struck metal. Voices continued behind walls. The road had entered a place capable of restoring what travel consumed. Before departure, the caravan took on supplies, but also accepted another limit. Every container and sack added weight. The correct amount was not the greatest amount. It was enough for the next stage, with reserve suited to the uncertainty ahead. The calculation began in the market and continued beside the animals. Grain occupied space differently from cloth. Fruit could refresh travelers but would not keep indefinitely. Fodder purchased cheaply became expensive if too much had to be carried past ground where grazing was available. Local sellers understood this better than newcomers. They knew which produce would last, which water vessels leaked after drying, and which road food required more fuel to cook than a traveler could expect to find. Knowledge could be included in the price without appearing on a scale. Maintenance of the carets belonged to another economy of knowledge. Shafts allowed workers to reach underground channels for clearing and repair. The alignment and gradient had to preserve flow across distance. Collapse, silt, and neglect threatened water that appeared effortless at its outlet. The people doing this work might never join a caravan. Their labor traveled anyway, converted into grapes, grain, shade, fodder, and filled water skins. Long-distance exchange depended repeatedly on people whose own movement remained local. The oasis also stored time. Crops gathered in one season could support travelers in another. Warehouses and jars held goods until prices, roads, or partners were favorable. A merchant did not always hurry west simply because the cargo had arrived. Waiting could preserve value better than movement. During that wait, boundaries between visitor and resident softened unevenly. A traveler returned to the same food stall. A repairer recognized a saddle she had worked on before. An interpreter carried a message between two courtyards and learned more of the business than either principal intended. Children watched animals from distant regions and learned which ones kicked. Dogs learned where scraps appeared when caravans entered. The celebrated meeting of cultures included such small adaptations, rarely written because everyone nearby already understood them. At dusk, air cooled quickly. Heat stored in walls and earth released slowly while water continued beneath the ground. Lamps appeared in openings. The caravan that had entered as one long line was now scattered through stables, rooms, shops, and yards. Before dawn, it assembled again. Fresh ties replaced worn ones. Purchased sacks filled the spaces left by consumed supplies. A guide counted animals by shape in low light. The oasis did not travel with them, but its water and food would become the strength of the next stage. The hidden channel offered a useful image for the network itself. At the surface, distant cities appeared separate. Beneath the famous names ran systems of maintenance that made connection possible: water knowledge, contracts, languages, paths, and relationships. Much of the structure remained invisible until it failed. Here is the detail to carry with you into sleep. A traveler kneels beside a shaded opening and lowers one hand to the channel. Cool water moves through the dark beneath a sunlit plain. It has crossed the ground without showing itself, arriving exactly where patient measurements intended it to go. A caravan moved at the speed of its working bodies. Those bodies differed by route. Bactrian camels, with 2 humps and heavy coats, were well suited to cold and arid regions of Central Asia. Horses, donkeys, mules, oxen, and yaks served where terrain, climate, and local practice made them useful. No animal belonged to every stage. The same was true of numbers. Caravans ranged from small groups to large enterprises. Fixed claims about a typical size, load, or daily distance hide more than they explain. Terrain, weather, fodder, cargo, health, politics, and the distance between water sources changed the answer. What remained constant was care. Before movement, loads had to be balanced. A pack saddle distributed weight across the body without concentrating pressure in one place. Padding protected skin. Straps held cargo firmly enough to prevent shifting while allowing the animal to breathe and walk. A poorly placed bundle announced itself gradually. The saddle leaned. A strap rubbed. The animal altered its gait. If ignored, a small imbalance could become an injury that stopped both animal and cargo. So the group paused. A knot was loosened. One package moved a little. A folded pad was replaced. The apparent delay protected the entire stage. Daily rhythm followed repeated checks. Departure might come early. The group moved while temperatures and light were favorable, halted according to water and grazing, then continued or made camp. On difficult ground, people walked beside animals rather than riding. At crossings, loads might need to be carried separately. Camp was not the absence of work. Animals were unloaded, watered, fed, tethered, or watched. Gear was inspected while damage remained repairable. Food had to be prepared from supplies chosen for transport. Fire depended on available fuel. Waste and water sources required care because another group might use the same place. Night watch guarded more than valuables. Animals could stray, weather could change. A sick person might need attention. A loose rope could become a missing pack animal by morning. The human body kept its own account. Dust dried the throat. Repeated walking changed the feet. Cold entered after sunset, even where the day had been hot. Clothing had to answer several conditions without the convenience of a wardrobe waiting at each stop. Food marked the day without making it luxurious. Grain could become porridge or flat bread according to supplies, tools, fuel, and local custom. Dried foods traveled well but demanded water. Fresh produce was welcome near settlements and less dependable between them. Tea belonged to some routes and periods more strongly than others. No single camp meal represented the whole network. Cooking vessels were selected for use, not display. A pot too heavy imposed cost on every stage. One too fragile created another repair problem. Soot on its base recorded fires whose locations would never enter a merchant's account. Personal possessions remained limited by the same arithmetic as cargo. Bedding, spare clothing, religious objects, writing tools, medicine, and gifts all competed for space. A wealthy traveler could assign more animals to comfort, but those animals still needed care. Illness altered the group. A fever or injured foot changed pace and raised questions without easy answers. Could the person recover at the next settlement? Who would remain behind? Which obligations continued if the owner of a cargo could not supervise it? Mutual assistance was practical, but it was not guaranteed. Companions had different resources and duties. Servants and enslaved people could be compelled to endure risks chosen by others. The calm rhythm of a caravan should not hide unequal control over who traveled and who worked. Animals experienced those inequalities most completely. A camel could carry profit without sharing it. Its value might encourage good care, but value and kindness were not the same thing. Marks of rubbing, changes in appetite, or reluctance to rise had to be noticed before calculation overruled attention. At a midday halt, loads lay on the ground in organized rows. For a short time, the animals' backs were bare. Dust showed where pads had rested. Drovers ran hands along skin and muscle, searching for heat or swelling. Then came loading again. The heaviest bundle was not automatically placed on the strongest-looking animal. Balance across the group mattered. Fragile goods needed a steady gait. An animal recovering from strain required less, even if the adjustment irritated an owner. When the caravan resumed, its order differed from the morning. One animal moved nearer the front where it could be watched. 2 bundles had changed places. A traveler walked who had ridden earlier. The group remained recognizable because it adapted. Relationships within the group were shaped by competence. The person who knew animals noticed trouble before the owner of the silk did. A guide's decision could outweigh a wealthy traveler's preference. A cook who managed fuel and grain well-preserved supplies for everyone. Status did not abolish dependence. The road also asked labor from the animals without giving them a voice in the bargain. A responsible history cannot treat them as silhouettes placed beside human achievement. Their hunger, thirst, injuries, endurance, and replacement were part of the cost of trade. Near the end of the day, arrival was measured in practical signs: smoke from a settlement, a cultivated line of trees, the sound of water, a wall that promised shelter. Only after the animals were cared for could the valuable cargo be considered safely at rest. Here is the detail to carry with you into sleep. 2 panniers hang from a pack saddle, one sits slightly lower. A drover loosens the cord, shifts a bundle by the width of his hand, and ties it again. The saddle settles level. The animal takes one step, then another, and the road resumes. The Tian Shan made season visible in stone and snow. Routes through and around these mountains connected the Tarim Basin with the valleys and settlements farther west. A pass was not merely a high point on a map. It was a temporary agreement among weather, animals, guides, pasture, and the condition of the track. That agreement could end. Snow closed routes, meltwater changed crossings, rockfall narrowed a path, wind made exposed ground difficult. A caravan arriving too early or too late could wait, turn back, or choose another corridor at great cost. Local knowledge mattered because mountains create sharp differences over short distances. A sunny valley did not prove that the pass ahead was open. Information from descending travelers carried more value than confidence formed below. Loads were reconsidered before the climb. Some goods could be stored and collected later. Animals suited to one region might be exchanged for others. Extra fodder increased security, but also burden. Every decision revealed that the caravan was not one unchanging unit marching across Eurasia. The ascent shortened the line. On narrow ground, animals followed with less room to pass. Drovers watched feet, straps, and spacing. A slipping load threatened the animal behind it. Conversation gave way to the sounds needed for movement. Cold complicated ordinary materials. Leather stiffened, fingers worked more slowly, rope held frost. A small repair that had been easy in an oasis required patience beside a windbreak. Yet mountain routes were inhabited and used, not blank ordeals between civilizations. Pastoral communities knew seasonal grazing. Settlements and stopping places occupied viable ground. Guides belonged to local economies. Trade depended on people whose expertise came from living near the supposed obstacle. From higher ground, the caravan could see valleys extending west. The view suggested openness, while the path remained narrow beneath each hoof. Long distance and immediate attention existed together. On the descent, conditions changed again. Water gathered differently, vegetation altered. The group approached the Jetisu region, where routes, towns, farming, and pastoral movement met. Goods carried from China entered markets, shaped by Turkic and Sogdian communities, and by political powers that changed across the centuries. The change in pasture altered animal care. Where grazing improved, carried fodder could be reduced, but access to grass was not simply free. Pastoral communities used these landscapes according to seasonal patterns and social claims. A visiting caravan needed permission, exchange, or established custom to enter without conflict. Guides negotiated more than direction. They connected travelers with people who controlled local resources, knew river conditions, or could supply replacement animals. Their value came from relationships as much as topography. A river crossing demonstrated that distinction. From one bank, the water looked manageable. Local people knew where the bottom remained firm, where current deepened after melt, and which approach allowed loaded animals to enter without crowding. Some cargo crossed above the waterline, some was wrapped again. Animals went in smaller groups. A rope stretched between people on shore, not as a dramatic rescue, but as an ordinary precaution. The crossing consumed much of the day. No great distance was added to the map, yet the route had advanced through the only distance that mattered, from one safe bank to the other. Beyond it, the caravan stopped early to dry gear. Damp padding placed beneath a load could injure skin. Wet cord behaved differently from dry. Cloth carried for sale was inspected where splashes had reached its outer wrapping. Mountain travel left evidence on objects. Scratches appeared on metal corners. Wood polished where rope moved. Repairs accumulated in several styles because different hands had worked on the same saddle. Equipment became a record of the route even when no one wrote one. The people changed too. A traveler who had feared the pass now worried about market prices. A guide who had been essential in the heights prepared to return east rather than continue into country where another guide had stronger ties. Payment marked the handoff. Information passed with it. Which animal tired first, which load disliked water, which traveler argued before breakfast, and which promise had been made to a community behind them. The new guide listened. The old guide turned toward the mountains. Expertise, like cargo, moved through relays. Crossing a range did not deliver the caravan into a new world with a clean border. Languages and objects had already moved in both directions. People from west of the mountains lived to the east. Chinese goods were known ahead. The pass connected overlapping regions rather than sealing opposites apart. camp below the snow line felt warmer than the night before. Damp rope was spread. Animals were checked once more. The mountain stage entered memory as a sequence of practical decisions, not one dramatic summit. Here is the detail to carry with you into sleep. Beside the morning fire, a rope lies across a flat stone. Frost along its fibers turns first to beads of water, then darkens the cord as it melts. No one pulls it yet. The caravan waits until the rope is flexible enough to trust again. Beyond the passes, the road entered a region where settled and mobile communities depended on one another. The Jetisu area, in and around parts of present-day Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, contained towns, farms, pasture, river valleys, and routes connecting China, Central Asia, and the steppe. Archaeological sites along the Chang'an-Tianshan corridor preserve evidence of trading settlements and the water systems that sustained them. A market there did not stand at a simple boundary between east and west. It gathered several directions at once. Pastoral communities supplied animals, wool, hides, dairy products, transport knowledge, and access to seasonal landscapes. Farmers supplied grain, fruit, fodder, and settled storage. Craftspeople repaired metal, wood, leather, and ceramic goods. Merchants connected these local economies with farther markets. Interdependence did not remove conflict or inequality. It made exchange necessary enough to continue despite them. At a trading place, the first task was classification. What exactly had arrived? In what condition? According to whose measure? Balance scales and weights offered one method, but weights themselves belonged to systems that might not match. Coins carried images and authorities familiar in one region and uncertain in another. An interpreter did more than replace one word with another. Commercial language contained assumptions about quality, quantity, obligation, and time. A promise to pay later needed terms both parties understood. A description of damaged cloth could become an argument if translation concealed degree. Sogdian served widely as a language of commerce across much of Central Asia during long portions of the first millennium. Its usefulness grew from communities and relationships, not from an official decision that everyone should speak it. Merchants established settlements and family connections along the routes. Language followed the network they maintained. Other languages remained present. Turkic speech, Chinese, local Iranian languages, and the languages of pilgrims and officials met according to place and period. No market was multilingual in exactly the same way forever. Goods changed identity through sale. A bundle described in one ledger by origin might enter another by color or owner. Large lots were divided. Small lots were combined. Packing suited to a mountain crossing was replaced by packing suited to the next road. News was weighed less formally, but traded just as eagerly. Conditions at a pass, a ruler's policy, prices in another city, the arrival of an envoy, or trouble along one branch could redirect capital and people. A rumor moved quickly because it weighed nothing. Its reliability required judgment. Judgment often began by asking who had carried the news. A drover reporting a river crossing spoke from different knowledge than a court messenger repeating policy. A merchant describing prices might be informing a partner or influencing a rival. The same sentence changed value with its source. Written messages helped, but did not remove interpretation. A letter could arrive late. A seal confirmed an association more readily than the truth of every claim inside. A reader needed language, context, and some understanding of the relationships behind the name. In the market, scribes made agreements durable. The form varied across communities and periods. Witnesses, marks, seals, and recognized formulas could support memory when partners separated. The document did not create trust from nothing. It gave a dispute something more precise to return to. Storage created another interval. Goods could remain behind walls while owners waited for a better buyer or assembled the next shipment. Warehouses concentrated wealth and therefore required guards, locks, records, and people accountable for access. The smell of a storeroom differed from the open road. Wool, leather, wood, dust, oil, and aromatics settled together. Bundles were raised from floors where damp might gather. Light entered only when a door opened, so inspection carried cargo briefly into the courtyard. Outside, animals were traded with attention to age, health, training, and suitability. A traveler purchasing a replacement did not need a symbolic Silk Road camel. He needed an animal able to work on the next terrain with the available fodder and handlers. Negotiation extended beyond price. Equipment might be included. Delivery might wait until morning. Responsibility for an undiscovered injury could become part of the bargain. An interpreter needed vocabulary for teeth, gait, saddle behavior, and every other detail on which value depended. By sunset, the market's apparent disorder had produced a new arrangement. Goods had owners. Animals had loads assigned for tomorrow. Letters had carriers. Travelers had learned which road they would share. The city did not merely receive movement, it edited it. The market also changed culture without staging a ceremony called exchange. A tune was heard and repeated. A garment detail was admired. A food was adapted to local ingredients. An image on metalwork entered another craft tradition. Borrowing could be enthusiastic, selective, misunderstood, or resisted. By evening, some travelers had sold everything they brought. Their long-distance journey might end there. Others acquired new cargo and prepared to continue towards Sogdian cities farther west. The objects moved on, but not necessarily with the people who had carried them over the mountains. Here is the detail to carry with you into sleep. On a merchant's cloth lie several balance weights and coins from more than one authority. The weights are arranged from large to small. The coins are not. An interpreter turns one coin between two fingers while both merchants wait for the next sentence. Samarkand was not simply another dot farther west. For many merchants, it was the center of a web. Sogdiana occupied oasis regions around the Zarafshan and Kashkadaria valleys, including Samarkand, Bukhara, and other principalities. These communities were not always politically united, but their merchants became central figures in exchange across much of Eurasia. They traveled, settled, translated, represented partners, and maintained relationships over generations. Sogdian communities appeared along routes into China. Their language became widely useful in Central Asian commerce. Their religious lives included Zoroastrian, Buddhist, Manichaean, and Christian traditions, changing across place and time. The strength of the network was not that every Sogdian merchant knew every other. It was that shared language, family links, community institutions, letters, agents, and reputation could make distant business less anonymous. A merchant did not need to accompany every bundle if someone trusted could receive instructions ahead. An agent could sell goods, collect payment, extend credit, or report why a plan had failed. A letter could carry a commercial decision farther than its writer intended to travel. The ancient letters found near Dunhuang make this network unusually personal. They belong to the early 4th century, before our main Tang frame, but they show people writing across the long space between China and Sogdiana. Commercial news shares the page with political disorder and private distress. The road enters the document through delay, uncertainty, and the need to rely on others. By the Tang period, Sogdian residents in Chinese cities could hold official roles, conduct trade, and maintain religious practices. Some families had lived east of Samarkand for generations. Calling them foreign merchants alone would miss the settled lives inside the network. At Samarkand, goods arriving from the east entered another field of expertise. Textiles could be evaluated and redirected. Metalwork and glass from western regions moved the other way. Artistic forms were not sealed to one origin. A textile made in Central Asia could combine techniques and motifs with several histories. Business still required ordinary rooms. Letters had to be read, accounts compared, cargo stored away from damp and theft, meals interrupted negotiation. Family obligations competed with commercial ones. A city famous for exchange was also a place where someone swept the floor after visitors left. Family made the network durable and complicated. Marriage could connect households and business interests. Children learned languages used by neighbors, customers, and relatives. A young person might enter an established partnership with advantages unavailable to an outsider, while also inheriting debts and expectations not freely chosen. Distance changed family life. Merchants could remain away for seasons or years. News arrived irregularly. A successful transaction in one city did not settle the loneliness or vulnerability recorded in a letter elsewhere. Miune's surviving complaint from Dunhuang is useful because it refuses the easy romance of mobility. Her husband traveled, but she was left without money or the consent and assistance required to return home. The same network that expanded one person's choices could narrow another's. Women participated in commercial households in ways the surviving record reveals unevenly. They managed property, maintained homes, and endured absences. Their work rarely appears in the famous image of mounted merchants, yet the network depended on households able to continue while members traveled. Religious communities offered another continuity. A merchant arriving in a distant city could find familiar practice, language, or burial tradition. Shared belief could create relationships across distance without turning every worshipper into a trader. The ordinary commercial world survives faintly. Worn coins, scratched writing, reused paper, broken seals, and letters that never reached the intended reader. A merchant office might contain objects from several regions without feeling exotic to its occupants. A scale made locally weighed foreign silver. An imported vessel held local food. Paper carried a language whose speakers lived far from the place associated with its name. This was not a melting pot in which distinctions vanished. Communities preserved identity while adapting to neighbors and authorities. Language could mark belonging as well as bridge it. Names themselves carried information. A personal name could suggest family, language, or religious background without fixing identity completely. Titles indicated office or respect. A letter writer selected forms of greeting suited to the relationship, placing social distance on paper before discussing money. Messengers became temporary custodians of all this meaning. They needed a route, a recipient, and enough reliability to protect a folded document whose contents they might not read. A lost post bag could silence several households and businesses at once. Copies and summaries reduced some risk. An instruction could be sent by more than one path. An agent kept accounts locally while the principal kept another record elsewhere. Agreement between records was never guaranteed, but duplication gave memory more than one home. In the evening office, a clerk sanded or dried fresh writing according to the materials in use, folded the sheet, and added the marks that connected it to the sender. The letter joined goods waiting for departure. It would occupy almost no room and might redirect an entire shipment. Reputation became visible when an expected payment did not arrive. Credit allowed trade to move without every transaction being settled in metal at once, but it also turned distance into anxiety. The absent partner could be delayed, dishonest, ill, dead, or simply waiting on another person farther down the chain. The network survived because people repeatedly decided whom to trust despite incomplete knowledge. Documents helped, community helped, law and authority helped unevenly, none removed risk. Here is the detail to carry with you into sleep. A letter addressed toward Samarkand lies open on a desk far to the east. The writer has left space between two lines, then added a final instruction in smaller script. The letter will travel home without him, passed from one reliable hand to another. Now we will let time widen. Roadside inns and protected stopping places existed in many forms across the routes. The great network of courtyard caravanserais associated with Iran, Central Asia, Anatolia, and neighboring regions developed over many centuries and intensified especially after our 7th and 8th century frame. We should not place one standard building beside every road. Still, the caravanserai expresses a durable need. Travelers required water, food, shelter, storage, space for animals, and some protection from the road at night. In the Persian tradition, location followed geography and security. Water mattered. A day's practical journey mattered. Climate shaped walls, roofs, materials, and openings. Some buildings stood near towns. Others occupied exposed roads where arrival before dark carried greater importance. The gate organized the evening. Animals entered first or in controlled sequence, bringing dust, noise, smell, and the awkward width of loaded bodies into a courtyard already shared by strangers. Goods had to be assigned space. Valuable bundles could not simply remain where hooves and weather reached them. Watering and feeding required order because every group arrived with its own fatigue. The inn was not silent refuge. It was compressed infrastructure. Drovers called to animals, metal fittings struck stone. Cooking fires produced smoke. Merchants asked about rooms, storage, prices, and news. Pilgrims and officials might share the same enclosure without sharing purpose or status. The courtyard's plan helped separate tasks without making them quiet. Animals occupied areas suited to tethering and feeding. Goods moved towards storage or rooms. Water might come from a well, cistern, kanat, channel, or supply carried from nearby, according to the site. In cold regions, shelter from wind mattered. In heat, thick walls and shaded spaces moderated the day. Building material followed what could be obtained and maintained: brick, stone, timber, earth, and plaster. The caravanserai was an answer to climate written in architecture. Not every answer succeeded equally. Roofs leaked. Water ran low. An innkeeper demanded more than expected. Crowding reduced privacy. Walls discouraged some dangers while concentrating wealth inside one known place. Travelers protected property through proximity, locks, companions, servants, and records. A bundle placed in storage still needed a clear owner. In the morning, similar packages had to return to the correct group. Food joined local production with transient appetite. Bread, grain dishes, meat, dairy, fruit, and drink varied by region, religion, season, and means. Travelers carried preferences, but the kitchen worked with what the surrounding community supplied. Conversation gathered after immediate work. Someone knew the Western Road. Someone had seen a market inspector. Someone recognized a family name in a letter. The courtyard turned private observations into shared, disputed knowledge. Sleep came unevenly. Owners found rooms. Drovers remained near animals. Guards listened. A late arrival disturbed people who had settled. Hooves shifted against stone. One camel's low call answered another across the dark. Before dawn, the process reversed. Fires began. Water was drawn. Loads emerged from storage. An argument over a fee had to be settled before the gate opened. The inn did not merely contain the night. It prepared the road to restart. That preparation required records. An inn receiving several groups needed to distinguish rooms, animals, stored goods, payments, and obligations. Practice varied, and many transactions left no surviving page, but memory alone became fragile when strangers arrived and departed each day. Repair work followed demand. A roadside complex could support smiths, farriers, leatherworkers, and sellers of rope or vessels nearby. Not every caravanserai contained every service. Networks grew strongest where one stop could draw on a settlement around it. The distance to the next stop shaped morning decisions. UNESCO broad account notes that caravanserais in well-served regions could stand roughly a day's journey apart, but that was never a universal grid. Terrain, water, security, and patronage determined actual spacing. A building founded through royal, private, religious, or charitable support still needed continuing resources. Endowment could fund public service, but roofs and cisterns did not maintain themselves through good intention. Staff, revenue, and local labor kept hospitality real. When the gate opened, groups did not leave together merely because they had slept together. One waited for payment. Another had already loaded. A pilgrim followed a road a merchant would abandon at the next junction. The courtyard released several journeys, not one caravan. Architecture offered security, not equality. Wealthier travelers could obtain better space. Servants and drovers continued working after owners settled. Animals remained laboring bodies even at rest. A gate could exclude as well as protect. Yet the courtyard created contact. People from different regions met long enough to compare roads, goods, languages, beliefs, and political conditions. A traveler might find a future partner, an interpreter, or a warning there. Ideas moved because people had time to talk while waiting for morning. The caravanserai also depended on work invisible in the famous facade. Water systems needed maintenance. Food and fodder had to arrive. Walls and roofs required repair. Waste had to be managed. Someone kept track of rooms, disputes, and property. After the last expected group entered, the heavy gate closed. The road remained outside, but its many purposes had gathered inside one rectangle of walls. Here is the detail to carry with you into sleep. A final pack animal crosses the threshold. Its load clears the wood by a hand's width. Two attendants lean against the gate, and the hinges turn slowly until the courtyard is enclosed. For the night, several roads end in the same place. By morning, the cargo may belong to someone else. This is the simplest correction to the old image of one merchant crossing the world. Long distance, goods often traveled through a sequence of owners, carriers, agents, markets, and states. Their continuity was material, not personal. A bale could be opened and divided. One portion entered a local household or court. Another joined goods moving farther west. The original wrapping was replaced. A seal was broken in front of witnesses. New marks connected the smaller bundles to new accounts. Taxes and duties removed value at boundaries and markets. Storage added cost. Damaged goods sold differently from sound ones. Currency conversion and credit altered the expected profit. By the time an object reached a distant buyer, its price contained many roads. It also contained losses that left no object behind. Food consumed by handlers, fodder consumed by animals, payments to guides, ferries, guards, interpreters, storage keepers, and officials. Time spent waiting while capital remained tied inside bundles. Merchants managed this by changing form and destination. A cargo expected to travel west might sell well earlier than planned. Another might be carried farther because a nearby market was full. Profit came from information as much as distance. Risk encouraged division. Placing everything in one shipment made accounting simple and failure severe. Dividing goods among carriers or routes could reduce one danger while adding coordination. The strategy belonged to circumstances, not a universal handbook. Partnerships spread cost and claim. One person supplied capital, another expertise, another transport, and another access to a market. Ownership could be layered. The person walking beside a bundle might not own it. The owner might owe part of its value to someone absent. When goods were repacked, containers entered local life. Cloth wrapping could be reused. Jars and boxes served new purposes. A foreign mark remained long after its contents disappeared. Repair changed objects too. A metal fitting replaced in another region might follow local form. A textile patched with available thread carried visible evidence of movement. Purity of origin was often less practical than continued use. At the final sale, the route could be forgotten. A buyer cared that the glass was clear, the spice fragrant, the horse sound, or the textile beautiful. The long chain collapsed into one judgment made across a counter. Museums later restore part of the chain through materials, techniques, inscriptions, and find locations. Even the best label cannot name every porter, host, translator, and animal between workshop and burial site. Counterfeit and adulterated goods added another layer of judgment. A distant origin could be difficult to verify. Buyers examined weave, color, weight, scent, workmanship, and the reputation of the seller. Expertise protected value where labels could be invented. Damage created negotiation rather than automatic rejection. Water staining reduced one textile's price while leaving another usable. A chipped vessel might be repaired or sold for material. Merchants separated loss from what could still be recovered. Insurance in a modern sense should not be projected uniformly across these routes, but people developed ways to distribute exposure through partnership, credit, diversified cargo, and shared transport. Risk was managed socially before it was expressed as a standardized product. Profit also had several destinations. It maintained households, funded another journey, repaid investors, supported religious gifts, purchased land, or disappeared into debt. The successful arrival celebrated in a story was only one line inside a longer account. When a partnership ended, the final calculation reached backward through the road. Expenses were challenged, damage was assigned, memory met written record. The physical cargo had completed its stage, but the commercial journey ended only when people accepted what the numbers meant. Its meaning could change too. Cloth produced for one use might be cut into another. A metal vessel could be valued for form, material, or foreign association. A religious image might be understood through a new tradition. An object did not carry one permanent explanation with it. Merchants stopped for many reasons. Their expertise ended. Their capital was tied to a familiar circuit. Family and property required return. Political permission did not extend farther. They sold to people who knew the next language, road, and risk. That handoff was not evidence of failure. It was the system working as designed without ever having been designed by one authority. Information traveled alongside the goods, but not perfectly. A buyer might know where an object had last been purchased rather than where it was made. Stories accumulated. Distant origin could be exaggerated because mystery increased value. Archaeologists and historians later reconstruct these movements from material, technique, inscriptions, documents, and find locations. A piece of cloth discovered far from where its fibers or pattern began is evidence of connection, but it does not reveal every hand that carried it. The missing hands are part of the history. In a courtyard, the old cord was cut. A new owner counted the contents. The bundle became several bundles. By afternoon, one traveled north and another west. The merchant who brought them turned back toward the pass with different cargo. Here is the detail to carry with you into sleep. An old knot rests on the floor after being cut away. Above it, A smaller bundle has been tied with clean cord. The goods continue. The knot that held the previous stage remains behind. Not everything on the Silk Roads could be inventoried. Languages traveled in memory and daily use. Religious texts traveled as objects, while teachings moved through explanation, translation, ritual, and community. Artistic motifs crossed regions because craftspeople saw, copied, altered, and combined them. Music moved through instruments, melodies, performers, and listeners who remembered only part of what they heard. None of this was automatic. An idea did not drift west because a road existed. A person carried it, another person understood enough to repeat it, and a community found some reason to preserve or adapt it. Translation could clarify and transform at the same time. Buddhism moved from the Indian subcontinent through Central Asia and into China across centuries of pilgrimage, patronage, teaching, and copying. Sogdian communities helped carry several religious traditions eastward. Monasteries offered places where travelers, texts, images, and local practice met. Technologies moved with similar complexity. Paper spread westward through knowledge, labor, materials, and institutions, not because one sheet completed a symbolic journey. Agricultural plants required suitable climate and cultivation. A decorative pattern might travel easily, while the technique needed to reproduce it did not. Paper makes the distinction clear. Knowing that paper existed was not the same as producing it. Makers needed fibers, water, tools, skilled processes, and demand. Administrators, religious communities, merchants, and writers helped turn a material technique into ordinary infrastructure. The same applied to weaving. A textile could be carried and admired immediately. Reproducing it required fibers, looms, dyes, and knowledge of structure. Local makers might copy a pattern through a different technique, creating resemblance without identical manufacture. Plants traveled as seeds, cuttings, fruit, recipes, and agricultural knowledge. Success depended on soil, water, climate, and care. A food associated with exchange became local only after cultivation and adaptation. Music required bodies and memory. Instruments could travel as cargo, but performance lived in practice. Court musicians, religious communities, entertainers, and ordinary listeners carried styles between settings. A rhythm welcomed in one city could be criticized as foreign in another and fashionable a generation later. Dress offered visible negotiation. Imported cloth could be cut in a local form. A foreign fastening could be copied in cheaper material. Authorities sometimes regulated clothing because appearance communicated rank, occupation, gender, religion, or affiliation. Translation shaped religious movement deeply. A sacred term rarely had one perfect equivalent. Translators selected words already carrying local meaning. Commentaries explained unfamiliar ideas. Images changed as artists worked within regional traditions. Pilgrims were not merely passengers beside merchants. They had destinations, sponsors, texts, vows, and communities of hospitality. Their routes overlapped commerce because both required transport and shelter, but their purpose changed how they understood hardship and arrival. No influence moved in only one direction. Chinese silk traveled west, while Western and Central Asian horses, glass, metal forms, music and motifs traveled east. India, Iran, the steppe and oasis communities were not spaces between two great ends. They were producers and centers in their own right. The phrase East meets West makes a neat headline and a poor map. The Silk Roads joined many neighboring worlds, each east or west only from somewhere else. Even a translation described as complete remained open to future readers. New copies introduced changes. Commentators explained terms differently. A text could become authoritative in a language its earliest authors never heard. Objects traveled without grammar, but still required interpretation. Confronted animals inside pearl roundels appeared across textiles associated with Iranian and Central Asian traditions. A maker or wearer could value the pattern without knowing its oldest history. Style moved through admiration, availability, and repetition. Knowledge also stopped. A craft secret might remain protected. A plant failed outside its climate. A text arrived where few could read it. A community rejected a practice. The network's connections were extensive, not unlimited. Absence matters because it prevents the Silk Roads from becoming a magical explanation for every resemblance across Eurasia. Similar solutions can arise independently. Sea routes and migrations carried influence too. Each claim needs evidence suited to the object, place, and date. The quieter truth is strong enough. Repeated human contact created opportunities for change. What happened next depended on the people receiving it. Exchange was not always welcome. Authorities regulated foreign practices. Communities resisted beliefs. Imported luxury could provoke criticism. Borrowing occurred beside conflict, hierarchy, and misunderstanding. Disease also traveled with human movement, but responsible history avoids turning the Silk Roads into one simple cause. Epidemics emerged through particular pathogens, environments, populations, trade and military movements, and many connected routes. The network could transmit vulnerability without explaining it alone. The most ordinary exchange may have happened without record. A cook learned another seasoning. A child repeated a foreign word. A repairer adopted a useful fastening. A traveler changed the way he folded a blanket after watching someone in another valley. Such changes rarely announce their origin. They become local through use. At an evening stop, someone played a melody on an instrument familiar to one group and strange to another. The second musician listened, then found part of it beneath his own fingers. By the time the tune reached another city, it was neither unchanged nor lost. Here is the detail to carry with you into sleep. A familiar melody begins on an unfamiliar instrument. The rhythm remains steady while the ornament changes. One listener closes his eyes, not to remember every note, but to keep the shape long enough to play it tomorrow. The Silk Roads did not close on one evening. Roots strengthened and weakened across centuries. Empires expanded, divided, and disappeared. Markets moved. Sea travel became more important in some periods and for some goods. Political security redirected caravans. New technologies changed the cost and speed of transport. The land network had never competed with only one alternative. Maritime routes had long connected ports around the Indian Ocean and beyond. River, sea, steppe, and desert systems overlapped. By the early modern period, changing oceanic commerce and political conditions reduced the old centrality of many overland corridors without erasing regional trade. Some caravanserais continued serving travelers. Others became ruins, storehouses, settlements, or monuments. Irrigation systems remained useful because local life still required water after famous long-distance traffic changed. Cities outlived the particular balance that had made them international hubs. Then new travelers arrived seeking the past. Explorers and archaeologists entered desert sites during the 19th and early 20th centuries. They documented, excavated, purchased, and removed manuscripts and objects under conditions now debated. Collections spread across institutions and countries. Preservation made study possible, while separation created another history of unequal movement. Today, the Silk Roads survive in buildings, textiles, coins, paintings, letters, languages, foods, religious communities, and landscapes shaped by water and travel. UNESCO heritage corridors preserve selected sites, not the whole network. No boundary can contain every consequence of so many routes. Preservation asks practical questions that once sustained travel. Water still threatens or supports structures. Wind removes surfaces. Earthquakes damage walls. Tourism brings money and wear. Conservators decide which repairs protect evidence without making an old building falsely new. Caravanserais that remain in use carry a different continuity from those preserved as archaeological sites. Adaptation can keep a building occupied while altering original fabric. Abandonment may protect some layers and expose others. There is no single afterlife for every stop. Manuscripts present their own obligations. Paper and textile respond to light, humidity, handling, and storage. Fragments removed from Central Asia now reside in collections across the world. Digital projects reunite images and records without physically returning the objects to one place. That digital reunion resembles the route unexpectedly. No institution holds the whole archive. Connection depends on standards, translation, cataloging, conservation, and cooperation among people responsible for one part. Modern political borders divide the ancient corridors among many states. Heritage work, therefore, requires diplomacy as well as archaeology. A route celebrated as shared history can also become part of national identity, tourism, and contemporary policy. The modern name Silk Road has expanded far beyond scholarship. It appears in businesses, travel advertising, festivals, and political projects. Its power comes partly from the smooth red line we set aside at the beginning. Historical care does not require abandoning wonder. It asks us to place wonder in the right thing. Not in a single camel train crossing a continent unchanged. In the ability of separate communities to maintain enough water, trust, language, repair, and shelter for objects and ideas to move beyond any one person's horizon. At a restored caravanserai, visitors may stand in the courtyard without hearing the animals that once filled it. At Dunhuang, a manuscript can be read on a screen far from the watch post where it survived. At Turpan, water still demonstrates the intelligence of gradients beneath dry land. The route's legacy is not only what traveled, it is the accumulated knowledge of how to receive a stranger, evaluate a claim, repair a load, share a language, and prepare for the next stage. We have followed the road backward from its famous distance into its smaller obligations. A bundle wrapped and listed, a gate opened, a channel carried water beneath dry earth, a saddle was balanced, a pass waited for weather, several languages gathered around a scale, a letter went home without its writer, a courtyard closed for the night, goods changed hands and continued. This is what the single red line leaves out. The Silk Roads were not one achievement completed by one civilization. They were repeated agreements among communities that did not always trust, understand, or govern one another. Exchange continued where enough people maintained the next stage. By morning, the caravanserai courtyard began to empty. One group turned toward a city, another returned to a familiar circuit. A third waited for an animal not yet fit to travel. Their paths overlapped briefly, then separated. The road did not move. People, animals, objects, and knowledge did. Here is the last detail to carry with you. Dawn reaches a track outside the gate. Hoofprints from yesterday remain in the cool ground. Wind has softened them, and new feet will soon cross over the old marks. The caravan is already beyond the next rise. The road is empty again, holding only the shape of passage. The file returns to its shelf, the lamp stays on, and whenever you're ready, the archive will be here.